Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gorenbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing a sensitive topic with regard to how do we deal with parents who are aging. Many of us are parents, many of us have aging parents, and we will all become aging parents at some point in our lives. I am pleased to welcome as my guest, as we discuss this important topic, Christina DiMichele, who is an associate with the law firm of Lipson Neilson in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Christina, welcome.
Hi, Henry. It's a pleasure talking with you today.
First of all, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are and your background?
Absolutely. Prior to private practice, I was the judicial attorney to Honorable Lipson Neilson in the Third Circuit Court. There, I learned the ins and outs of family law. I got to know pro per litigants as well as seasoned and practiced attorneys, as well as judges. It was an invaluable experience, and I apply what I learned in that experience to my private practice on a daily basis.
And what is the focus of your practice with Lipson Neilson?
I primarily practice at Lipson Neilson family law, professional liability, and business litigation.
Your parents, they're aging, but they're not that old. And the question is, and we've discussed this, how do you start a conversation about touchy subjects such as finances, health, and other issues with your parents? And, it's difficult. So how do you do it?
Absolutely. I'm at the point of my life where I have a 1.5-year-old, as well as a little one brewing right now. And I'm starting to see the transition in the dynamics with my parents. And growing up, I saw and I still see my parents and aunts taking care of my grandparents, accompanying them to doctor's appointments, meetings with their financial advisors, accountants, assisting with their filing of taxes, paying bills, among various other things. I can vividly remember when my maternal and paternal grandfathers passed away, my parents and their respective siblings, they knew the burial and funeral arrangements, the specific cemetery, the burial plot, the headstone. They knew what attorney to take my grandparents to see. They knew what banks my grandparents had accounts at. They knew where to go. They knew what to do. And the important questions to ask yourself, if your parents or loved one passes away, do you know what to do? Do you know where to go? Do you know what their wishes are? And if they have a trust or a will and a safe, do you know the combination to access it? And what if you pass away? Do your adult children or family members have the answers to these, preliminary questions? Oftentimes these questions, they're not addressed or they're talked about during someone's lifetime, which results in, unfortunately, a already stressful, emotional, and difficult situation becoming more stressful, more emotional, and more difficult. My parents are getting older and there's a transition of roles starting to happen. For example, my sisters and I accompanying my parents to doctor's appointments. We're having conversations that, while difficult, they need to happen. And talking and thinking about a day when a loved one is no longer here, it's extremely difficult. You don't want to think about it. However, like you said, Henry, that day will eventually happen. And having these conversations ahead of time, it's vitally important. And a way to do this is to sit down with your parents or your loved ones and mention this discussion that you and I are having today, what we talked about, and what you took away. That's frankly an easy transition to a very difficult conversation and difficult questions to be asked. For example, Mom, I was listening to this interview and they were talking about important discussions people have with their parents or should have. And as I was listening, I realized we've never had that discussion or conversations. And I don't know those answers to many of the questions that they posed. This conversation you and I, Henry, are having is a great segue and easy transition for other people to have that conversation with the people that they loved most. And the important thing to just remember is the conversation has to occur.
Absolutely. And you framed it so well. Christina, what are some signs that you should look for when you are about to have this conversation? I mean, I was thinking about the fact when we were talking earlier about the fact that some people are totally with it in their 80s and 90s. And then I've known of attorneys in their 60s who had early onset Alzheimer's and soon could no longer practice law, could no longer function. So it can happen to anyone. So what are some signs that you would advise our viewers to look for to start having these conversations?
The biggest thing that you want to look for is you want to make sure that your parent or your loved one is, one, feeling comfortable, that they're in a situation where they might not be out in public or at a restaurant, wherever it may be, where you're talking about sensitive information that they may feel uncomfortable to talk about in public. They don't want other people knowing what bank accounts they have or where they have these accounts at. But also, you want to make sure that they're not having any cognitive problems. You want to make sure that your loved ones understand the questions that you're asking. And you want to make sure that after you do ask the question, that they are responding accordingly. If you pose a question and they're responding not exactly as you expected, or they're not directly answering the question, that's when you need to start looking into other, start paying a little bit more attention. Where is there cognitive issues that are happening? Because if that's the case, you'd want to definitely get them evaluated.
Christina, should other siblings be involved in these conversations?
Absolutely. I have 2 younger siblings, and I would strongly recommend that siblings either be there in person, by telephone, or by Zoom. And the reason is you don't want any issues coming up later down the line where, there's allegations that one child or sibling has influenced the parent to the detriment, or that is what things can happen in the future. And by having everyone there, it eliminates issues in the future.
Let's talk about some of the questions. First of all, what would you ask your parents about their finances? And, it's like a taboo subject. People don't like to talk about money, and people are very, very secretive.
Absolutely. And, it's also the transitioning of the dynamics where your whole life you have your parents who are these role models and these people that have been taking care of you. Then all of a sudden you're asking them about their finances. It seems uncomfortable and awkward at first, but those questions have to be asked. You want to ask them about their income, pensions, Social Security, investments, deferred compensation, stocks, bonds. Like I said before, you want to know what banks they have accounts in. You would also want to ask about retirement investments, credit cards that they have, if any. If there's safe deposit boxes that exist, where are those safe deposit boxes? In fact, on pages 15 through 19 of a very helpful book titled Listing Life Fully, this category of questions is specifically laid out for convenience.
What about money management issues? I mean, it's like some people can't balance a checkbook even in their 20s and 30s. And as we're aging, sometimes we can fall victim to schemes and scams, and, your checking account, your passwords, your, where all your investments are critical. So how do you handle issues involving money management with your parents?
Well, you want to know how they manage their money, how much is spent on groceries, utilities, how much is spent on clothing, their miscellaneous expenses. Do they have a financial advisor? If not, is one necessary? You want to make sure that, you want to know, is there enough money saved for a rainy day? While it's expensive when you have young ones, and I'm starting to learn that myself, it's also expensive when you get older. There's medical costs, there's prescriptions, there's rehabilitation if needed, insurance. You want to make sure that there's enough, or whether there is money for a rainy day. And if there's not, how can you manage, or how can you go about assisting that loved one into managing their finances to enable them to live comfortably down the road?
Christina, what about plans for retirement? I mean, you're people in their 60s, usually now retired, in their 70s, more and more are retired or close to it. So what about discussion about these issues?
If they're young, I'll say young, but if they're pre-retirement, have the conversation of when do they plan on retiring? And then after they do plan on retiring, what do they want to do? Do they plan on staying in Michigan? We know that the winters are cold here, that a lot of people sometimes go south or they go to Arizona or a warmer climate. Do they plan to do that? If they do, what are their living arrangements? If that's not part of the plan for financial reasons, what can you do to help them in those winter months? Plowing the snow, helping them getting their mail. Also, do they object to living in a retirement home? Do they prefer one? Also, a conversation is I'm of the position that you want to keep yourself young, keep that mind stimulated. So after retirement, what do they plan on doing to get out of the house, to get some fresh air, to interact with others? Those conversations you want to have ahead of time. So by the time retirement age comes, you know, all you have to do is help your parents or loved ones.
Christina, what about estate plans, including wills and trusts? I mean, important, but too many people don't have them.
Yeah, too many people don't have one. And if they do, a lot of people don't know where they are. If there is a will or a trust, where is that will or trust located? Who is the attorney who drafted the will or trust? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are the various designations in the will and trust? If there's not, then it would be the recommendation, I'm assuming Henry, but of myself, that you would want to get to an attorney. We have plenty at Lipson Neilson who are absolutely experienced in drafting wills and trusts that we could get you in touch with to get yourself or your loved one to get one drafted and then get one drafted.
Christina, powers of attorney. I mean, these are designations where you're empowering, it could be a daughter, it could be a son or someone else to perhaps manage your affairs with regard to money matters. It could be other things. Tell us a little bit about those issues.
Well, things change very quickly, and things happen in the future that none of us expect. But is it going to be necessary? Possibly. Is it going to be a situation that you will have to take over for your parents? Possibly. Who would that person be? Those are the conversations that you want to have with your parent or loved one, as well as your siblings ahead of time. Because if the time is necessary, you already want to have that plan in place.
Christina, what about issues involving medical designations? You know, there can be a catastrophic accident or a severe illness. What about that situation?
Well, first, it's important to know if this designation of someone has already been selected. That way, if a catastrophic accident or illness occurs, that person can step right in. Otherwise, you are left in a difficult situation, just becoming that much more difficult. If someone has not been designated, then that's when you and your family and loved ones would want to come together, discuss who that person would be. If there's a medical doctor, if there's a nurse, if there's someone with medical expertise that would be better suited for that position, that's definitely something to take into consideration.
Guardianships. I've seen families go through bitter disputes as to who should be guardian over mom or dad, or looking over each other's shoulders, and a total lack of trust, especially when there's a lot of money involved. What are your recommendations in this area?
Absolutely. And that's why you want to have these conversations early. When you have an emotional and difficult situation with a parent who is in need of a guardian and emotions are high, and if there's money involved, things can get quite murky. If this conversation is had ahead of time of who that guardian would be, who is best suited, if it's a sibling, if it's a different loved one, whoever it may be, that conversation ahead of time without the emotional strain on it oftentimes can make everyone think a little bit more clearly, a little bit more logically. And every situation is different, but things can change quickly, and a guardian may be needed in the blink of an eye. So to have that conversation ahead of time is vital.
Driving, especially here in the Detroit metropolitan area, as well as most metropolitan areas in the United States, being able to drive is critical. But we reach an age where maybe we shouldn't be driving. How do you handle this discussion?
You know, I just had this discussion with my grandmother the other day. If driving becomes an issue, then a serious conversation, it needs to happen. It may even become necessary to put some parameters, or you can call them requests, in place, such as not driving past a certain hour. My grandmother the other day, she wanted to go to Target. It was 6:30 at night and then come over our house. By that time, sun has set, it is dark. I told her absolutely not. Go home. I will call you tomorrow and I will see you tomorrow. Because if an accident occurs, it can affect not only your loved one, but someone else on the road, which is never what anyone wants to happen. And in the event that an accident does occur, that is when you definitely want an evaluation to take place.
Housing can be an issue, and there can be numerous areas with regard to housing. I mean, questions says, should someone still remain in a normal house? Should you be downsizing? Should you move from a multi-story dwelling to one where you don't have stairs, such as a ranch? Is it time to move into a senior residence, even if you're still mobile and active? I mean, how do you discuss these issues?
Every person has different views and preferences when it comes to senior residences. And if a senior residence is the right choice in your situation, then you want to go there and personally tour the facility, talk with staff if possible. If there's other residents there, talk with them, see how their experience is. The most important part is you want to talk to your loved one and make sure that they are comfortable with that facility if they are cognitive and able to express their preferences. And then if the senior residence is the right choice and they are placed there, you want to talk to your loved one. You want to check up on them, make sure that they're doing okay, check in with the nurses, check in with the staff, make sure that nothing is happening or there's no issues that you're not being aware of. Oftentimes seniors, they still want to remain in their house, but it comes to a point where if they're not able to adequately take care of themselves in that house, then a senior residence may be necessary, regardless if that is their first choice. It might be the safe choice.
Another question which would tie in with this, what if someone really needs help and the family members can't give the help, but someone still wants to remain at home? What about discussion with regard to bringing in, a caretaker, an aide?
Yeah, there's caretakers, there's aides, there's also special necklaces that now have little beepers at the end of it. So if a loved one were to fall when they're living by themselves, if they always wear this necklace, they can kind of click the button and then it alerts specific telephone numbers that are attached to it, or 911 EMS if necessary. But you want to make sure that you check up on those elderly or your loved ones if they're living alone, especially with the winter months fast approaching.
Now, when someone passes away, there's an estate, but there are often items, there can be specific requests of money to different siblings, but often you're dealing with jewelry, there could be antiques, there could be keepsakes. How do you discuss and deal with some of these issues?
Well, if there's a will or trust in place and the estate plan specifically articulates where or who is supposed to be getting the jewelry or heirlooms or other items, then it kind of makes it easy. However, if there's not an estate plan that has that specific designation, then that's when you would want to have the conversation of what jewelry is there, the jewelry that is there, who would be gifted that jewelry. The same thing with heirlooms. What is there? Who would be designated with receiving that item? Knowing what items there are and then who would be receiving those items is what is important to know.
Often people leave charitable gifts or contributions, especially if someone dies of an illness, or it may be for Parkinson's, it may be for cancer, for heart disease. And often these are in a death notice, but how do you handle this, knowing in advance what to do? Well,
you want to know first what important charities or charitable gifts or contributions, what those are. Also, you want to know what dollar amounts, if any, that your parent or loved one wants to go to those charities. And then, frankly, if you want to know more about this information, it's actually located on page 29 of Listing Life Fully. Because again, this conversation is never easy, but with the book, it kind of lays out category by category, subtopic by subtopic, with charitable gifts and contributions being one of those topics.
Another issue is funeral arrangements, and someone in the military may want a military funeral. Other people may want something different, something unusual. How do you discuss these issues with your parents, especially since it's something that, it's like we don't like to talk about death, dying, taxes, money. So how do you deal with funeral arrangements?
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation, but you want to know your loved one's preferences. Do they have a specific outfit that they want to wear? Are there special songs that they would like performed? Pallbearers, are there certain ones that they want selected? Funeral arrangements, they're often costly. So you also want to verify that there are sufficient funds, and if not, at least some plans on how to cover those costs.
You mentioned the book Listing Life Fully. How does this help with regard to plans for aging parents?
Listing Life Fully is extremely helpful for a number of reasons. First, it lays out category by category, different topics and subtopics to address. Underneath each topic are blank lines, so you or your loved ones can fill in the information. This can be done during the conversation or after the conversations occur. Second, it also allows for what I like to call a one-stop shop of information, meaning it provides for one location of important information that can help if a loved one becomes cognitively impaired. And two, it can help make a difficult situation become less burdensome in the unfortunate event of death.
Christina, it sounds like you've already had some of these conversations. Was it difficult having them? I mean, did you prepare for them? Did you discuss in advance with your siblings how you were going to approach some of these issues?
I have had these conversations, and it's because maybe I'm Italian and we're kind of always in each other's business. But for me, I saw the way that my parents took care of their parents, and I want to be able to do the same thing for mine. We have conversations at the table about where certain bank accounts are, who their financial advisor is. My dad has in his office a little sheet of important numbers, and those important numbers are for his attorney, his tax accountant, and other important individuals who I would have to contact in the event of death. Yes, my parents are younger, but like I said before, we never know when something can happen. Did I just sit down one day at the dinner table and say, hey, if you die, where is X, Y, and Z? No, it was a slow conversation that eventually took form. But I'm also fortunate enough that my parents are still relatively younger. They're completely cognitively there. But some people might not be in the same situation as I am. So they might have to have the conversation a little bit quicker and a little bit more on set to get some of these answers when these answers truly, they need to be known.
Christina, did you find any resistance when you had conversations, first of all, with regard to your grandmother regarding driving and also with regard to your parents on some of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. With my grandmother, both of them, they are little spitfires. They love their independence. They both are driving, and they don't want anyone telling them what to or not to do. But when I had that conversation, I had to explain it's not about you. You have to remember that you would be leaving all of your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren behind if, God forbid, something happened. Furthermore, you have to think of the other people that are on the roads, their loved ones that could be lost if you make a bad turn, if you don't see a red light, or you think you see a green light, but it's really red. Those conversations are never easy. Did they listen? Yes. Did they like my answer? No. But in the end of the day, did they know that I was right? Absolutely. So it's not easy, but it had to be done. With my parents, I have a father who is, strict my entire life, even now married with children. He kind of still is strict with us, but he understood why we were having the conversation and he respected the conversation. He knew that we were only trying to take care of him and his future the way that he took care of and is still taking care of his parents. And with that, he looked at us in a new light, frankly, and he saw us as maybe not so much his little girls, but more as his adult daughters who are only starting to transition into the children now taking care of their parents. And with that came respect.
It sounds like you've handled some difficult issues in an admirable fashion. What advice would you give to someone else who's facing some of these issues as to how to handle it?
Advice I would have would be start early. It doesn't have to be a full-blown conversation the first time. You can gradually start into the conversation with more lighthearted questions to gradually more intense subject matter. You can also approach it with, listen, let's sit down at a certain day, a certain time in the family room. Let's open a bottle of wine, if you drink or if not, and try to be in a relaxed atmosphere and discuss it like adults. And that way everyone is comfortable. And also you want to make sure that you have this conversation sooner rather than later. We talked about it, Henry, and things can happen before in a blink of an eye. And 5 years can turn to 10 can turn into 15, and 15 can turn into too late. So you want to have these conversations sooner rather than later. And like I mentioned, ask lighthearted questions as well as more difficult questions such as funeral wishes. You want to write down the information that's gathered, such as enlisting life fully, and you want to keep that information in a safe place. It's useless if you write down the information but then can't find it later on. Also, you want to know your loved one's preferences, and you want to truly try to adhere to them if possible. Things change, so that might not always be you might not always be able to in every situation, but as many as you can, you want to try to do that. And then my last one would be, you just want to enjoy every minute with your loved ones. Life is short, and enjoy every precious moment.
Those are so true. Are there any other final thoughts before we sign off? We've got about a half minute left, Christina.
No, I am good. I just hope everyone takes this conversation that we have seriously. And like I said at the beginning, use this conversation as a tool, as a great transition to approaching these difficult topics and these difficult conversations with your parents or loved ones.
Christina, I want to thank you so much for being our guest on Gracefully Graying. This is such an important topic, and you really covered a lot of important issues. And I want to thank our viewers for watching Gracefully Graying.
Thank you, Henry. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being my guest.